High above the Indian Ocean, disaster strikes.
The engine's on fire!
More than 10 kilometers in the air, all 4 engines of a British Airways 747 stopped working.
Roger, declare emergency.
Mayday, 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 Speedbird 9.
With no engines and little power, British Airways Flight 9 falls towards the ocean.
Standby ignition on.
The crew fight to keep their plane from crashing into the sea. What has crippled their massive jet, threatening the lives of everyone on board?
Mayday, mayday.
June the 24th, 1982. British Airways Flight 9 cruises through the sky over Indonesia. In a few hours, the plane and all 263 people on board are scheduled to land in Perth, Australia. Phyllis Welch and her daughter are seated in cabin E at the very back of the enormous jet.
How's that heroine of yours, Fanny Price, faring?
Oh, she's having a tough old time at Mansfield Park. It's a good place for me to spend a few hours.
Wouldn't mind being there myself.
It's all right, Mum, we'll get there.
We had already traversed at least 2 time zones. We were very tired. We had flown through Bombay, through Kuala Lumpur, hadn't been able to get much sleep, if any, and it was a dark, dark, pitch-black night.
Ahead of Betty and Phyllis, Charles Capewell is returning home to Perth, Australia, with his 2 boys, Chaz and Stephen.
Right, settle down, lads. Come on. It's time for a nap. Get back to your seat.
No.
What, do you want to sleep here? All right.
It was a good flight. It was going well. Leaving London, it was great. And we was all eager to go home, and the 2 boys were eager to get back to Mum. I thought, well, we'll be home in 3 hours, Perth. They'll be Pat and we'll get in a taxi and we'll be home.
While many of the passengers have been travelling for almost a day, the crew is fresh. They took control at the last stopover in Kuala Lumpur. Captain Eric Moody got his first taste of flying at the age of 16 when he took a gliding lesson. He was one of the first ever trained on the 747.
Roger, check with Jakarta.
Jakarta Control, Speedbird 9 over Halim at level 370.
Speedbird 9, roger.
First Officer Roger Greaves has been a co-pilot for more than 6 years. Barry Townley Freeman has been a flight engineer on these aircraft for just a little longer.
I'd not flown with Eric before, or Barry. That was the first time we'd actually met on that flight.
As the jet flies over the city of Jakarta, it's cruising at more than 11,000 meters and has been in the air for an hour and a half. Captain Moody checks his weather radar. It shows smooth sailing for the next 500 kilometers.
All right, Roger, it's all clear. Just keep your eyes open. I'll be back in a moment. Just got to use the loo.
Back in the cabin, many of the passengers have fallen asleep. While Charles Capewell and his sons doze, an ominous haze appears above their heads. It's still legal to smoke on passenger jets in 1982. For the cabin crew, though, the smoke seems thicker than normal.
Seems to be a lot of smoke out there.
They begin to worry that a small fire may be smoldering somewhere on the plane.
Maybe someone lit up in the toilet. Let's go see if we can find it.
A fire at 11,000 meters is a terrifying prospect. If there is a blaze somewhere, the crew must find it immediately. In the cockpit, the flight takes an unsettling turn.
Barry and I were just sitting there minding the shop. Pitch dark night, of course. And then we started to get these pinpricks of light on the windscreen.
St. Elmo's fire?
I don't think so.
St. Elmo's fire is a natural phenomenon that's sometimes seen when planes fly through highly charged thunderclouds. But there aren't supposed to be any thunderclouds tonight.
Anything on the radar?
No. No, it's clear. I don't like the look of this. Let's get a better look out there.
With the help of their landing lights, the two men are disturbed to see a thin layer of cloud surrounding their plane, even though nothing is showing up on their radar.
But at 37,000 feet, the normal thing you would anticipate would be high cirrus, which is just a thin layer of cloud.
I think we better get the captain back up here.
I was reading my book, and there was a slight flick of turbulence, just a slight flick, and I glanced over to the left, where I had a clear view of the port wing, and to my surprise, it was covered in a brilliant, white, shimmering light, which seemed to be clinging to the wing of the aircraft. I carried on reading, but I found that I kept reading the same paragraph over and over again and not taking in a word of it. I just didn't know what was happening.
In the cabin, the smoke begins to thicken. Stewards have been unable to figure out where it's coming from. If there's a fire, they can't find it.
All right, well, go see that the passengers are comfortable.
Smell anything odd, Mum?
Seems rather smoky in here.
I noticed that thick smoke was pouring into the cabin through the vents above the windows. And that was a very sobering sight.
Turkish cigarettes.
It smelt like a sort of a sulfuric electrical smell. And I went on that flight deck expecting to hear that we had some electrical smoke somewhere on the aircraft. But nothing was further from the truth.
When did it start?
Well, just after you stepped out.
Anything on radar?
No, it's clear, not a cloud. Oh my lord, look at engine 4! It's lit up somehow. Captain, have a look at number 1.
It's the same on my side.
None of the crew have ever seen anything like this before. But the light show is just the beginning. Their bizarre flight is about to take a terrifying turn for the worse. Strange lights are striking the windshield of a British Airways passenger jet heading to Perth, Australia. At the same time, the plane's engines are lit by a brilliant white glow.
Look at engine 4! It's lit up somehow.
This light show, if you like, had become more intense. In fact, we ended up sitting there with 2 sheets of brilliant white light in front of us in place of the windscreens.
Inside the cabin, smoke has been growing thicker. Chief Steward Graham Skinner has been organising an intense but quiet search for fire.
What's with all the smoke?
There was smoke in the cabin. It got really, really hot. You were perspiring, literally drenched in perspiration. The acrid smoke was at the back of your throat, up your nose, in your eyes, and you were rubbing this and your eyes were running, and it was, it's not a very nice situation at all.
Flight engineer Barry Townley Freeman has been checking his instruments carefully. He's smelled the smoke, but so far has no indication that there's a fire in any of the plane's systems.
Can't find anything.
With one mystery confronting them, they're suddenly faced with a frightening new situation.
Dad! The engine's on fire!
The whole of the wing was a sheet of light. And I thought, wow. I said, oh, you better close that because we don't know what's that.
Cheers. Sit down.
Where are they going?
Stephen, close the blind.
Then I realised that, you know, something was dramatically wrong.
There were huge flames coming out of the back of the engines. 20, some people said 40 feet long. These huge jets of sheer flame shooting out of the back of all the engines. Is it going to penetrate from the outside of the aircraft? Is it going to come into the cabin? Are we going to burn to death? Are we going to choke to death on the smoke? What's going to happen? What's causing it? What are they going to do about it?
As fire engulfs the engines, one of them revs loudly and flames out.
Engine failure. Number 4.
Fire action, number 4.
Checklist, power and gear.
Set.
Thrust lever.
Closed.
Start lever.
Off.
Once one engine fails, you call for the drill to shut that one down. You have drills for certain things so that you don't fly together as a crew forever. You can fly with different people then, and you can standardise the operations.
The instruments do not indicate a fire on the plane, but the passengers can see flames erupting from the engines and stretching down the length of the 747.
I could not see the engines from where I was sitting. I could only see the space behind them. But there was enough glow in that space to convince me that the aircraft was really seriously on fire.
We were in trouble. They knew, as long as they were, they knew we were in bad trouble. And they sort of just looked at me as if to say, well, what are we doing now, Dad?
If anything's going to happen, I want to be close to you. Oh, please.
The cabin crew begins storing anything that's loose. They don't want dishes or bottles flying around the cabin if the plane begins to dive.
Don't worry, it's just friction.
If I was misleading them, then that was for a reason, because I didn't want to get as upset as I felt. I just couldn't believe it. And, you know, this is going through my mind, and yet I'm chatting to the passengers and chatting to the crew, saying, oh, yeah, nothing to worry about. Yeah, it's just a little hiccup, you know.
The 747 is more than 10 kilometers above the ocean. Its engines appear to be burning, and peculiar smoke continues to fill the cabin. And then, the unthinkable happens.
Number 2, engine's gone.
All right then, begin the engine shutdown.
No, wait! They've all gone. All 4 engines have failed.
The other 3 just went out almost immediately, and that's when it begins to be a serious emergency.
Those engines made a grating, rumbling sound, almost like a cement mixer. And then, gradually, the noise just disappeared and they became silent.
A minute and a half, we've gone from 4 engines running normally to having none.
The 747 has plenty of fuel, yet somehow all 4 of the jet's engines have completely stopped working.
Roger, declare emergency.
Mayday, 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 Speedbird 9. We have lost all 4 engines out of 370. Mayday, 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 Speedbird 9. We've lost all 4 engines.
With no engine power and no idea what has crippled their plane, British Airways Flight 9 begins falling from the sky.
Jakarta Control, Speedbird 9, we have lost all 4 engines. Now out of 360.
First Officer Roger Greaves issues a mayday, but he has trouble getting his message across.
Jakarta Control, Speedbird 9, we have lost all 4 engines. Repeat, all 4 engines. Now descending through flight level 350.
Speedbird 9, you have lost number 4 engine?
This idiot doesn't understand. Jakarta Control, Speedbird 9, we have lost all 4 engines. Repeat, all 4 engines. Now descending through flight level 350.
The air traffic control at Jakarta, unfortunately, seemed to have a slight problem in understanding what we actually were saying.
Only when another plane nearby relays the mayday call do controllers in Jakarta understand.
Now descending through flight level 350.
Speedbird 9, all 4 engines out. Understood?
As far as the crew knows, no 747 had ever lost power to all of its engines before. The crew has to find out why it's happening now.
I think we've cocked something up.
We were concerned and worried that we'd done something wrong, to cause the whole thing.
All 3 of us felt exactly the same, and it was a personal guilt in the sense of, what have I missed? What have I done wrong? Because this kind of thing doesn't happen.
While not built for gliding, even without its engines, a 747 can travel forward 15 kilometers for every kilometer it drops. With no power, Flight 9 has started a long, slow fall. Some 10 kilometers above the ocean, the crew has less than half an hour before they smash into the sea.
When they all stop, you go into automatic mode, obviously. We had practiced this drill on the simulator many, many times, and that's very good and all very well, as long as when it happens to you for real, what happens on the aeroplane is mirrored by what happens to you in the simulator, and I'm afraid that wasn't so.
In the simulator, when all 4 engines stop, the autopilot turns off. But high above the Indian Ocean, Captain Moody sees that his autopilot is still on.
We were all 3 confused and concerned that what was happening to us wasn't what we'd been told would happen to us.
All right, begin restart drill.
In the heat of the situation, they have no time to figure out why the autopilot is still on.
On.
Anything? Anything?
No.
Again.
All right then, from the top, battery.
Check. On.
Crossfeed valves.
Open.
Fire switch.
In.
The standard restart drill takes up to 3 minutes to complete. Plunging from the sky, the crew has fewer than 10 chances to get their engines going before they run out of time.
Never on. Come on.
Again, gentlemen.
All right, from the top, battery.
Check. On.
Crossfeed valves.
Open.
Fire switch.
In.
At 10,000 meters, Captain Eric Moody decides to turn the plane back toward the closest airport, Halim, just outside Jakarta. But even that is too far away if he can't get at least some of the engines going again.
Jakarta, Speedbird 9, turning left back to Halim, out of 300.
Speedbird 9, radar cannot see you. Squawk Alpha 7700.
Air traffic control asks them to transmit the emergency transponder signal.
Jakarta, Speedbird 9, we are already squawking 7700.
Now the crew is flying back to an airport that can't find them on radar. Without the constant rumble of the engines, the cabin is quiet. Some of the passengers feel the plane beginning to descend. But without communication from the cockpit, they can only guess.
The quietness was unbelievable, because it was sort of, the aeroplane was no engines, nothing, and it seemed to be eerie, a bit surreal really, because like as if you was suspended in space or something. And all I could feel was this quietness and the whimpering from a few people that were really upset.
Some people were sitting quite rigidly, almost as if they hadn't noticed anything. At first it was sheer fear. And then, after a while, it turns to acceptance. You know you're going to die. We knew we were going to die.
What's going on? What's the problem?
It's just a technical fault. I've been through much worse, let me tell you. Everything will be fine.
I think if I'd have sat down and really thought of exactly what was happening, I don't think I would have ever got up again.
One steward came up to us and said, "Are you two ladies all right?" And yes, we said, "We're fine," which was an absolute lie, but that's how it was. It seemed absolutely vital not to panic.
Captain Moody can't restart the engines unless he can keep the plane flying between 250 and 270 knots. But the airspeed indicators aren't working.
Captain, I've got 320 knots on my side.
Well, I've got 270.
Well, bloody hell, that's a 50-knot difference.
I'll change the speed.
Falling from the sky with no engine power, the crew now have no idea how fast they're going. But to have the best chance to restart the engines, Captain Moody has to have the plane flying at the right speed.
So from that point onwards, Eric then varied the speed through just about 100-knot range, hoping that at some point or other, coincidental with us putting the fuel into the engines, that we would actually be at the right speed.
To change speeds, Captain Moody turns the autopilot off. Then he slowly pulls the nose of the jet up to slow it, and then pushes it down to increase his speed. The upsetting roller coaster movement adds to the panic felt in the cabin.
At one time, the aircraft developed a strange motion. It seemed to be climbing steeply and then diving down. That was the sensation we got. And a bucking action that was so violent that we felt it could break the aircraft up in the air.
Pressure warning, Captain. We're at 10,000.
Pressure warning? That's not supposed to do that.
And a warning horn went off. Now, this didn't ever happen on the simulator in this exercise, so it was a bit of a surprise to us.
As well as providing electrical power, the engines on a jumbo jet help keep the cabin pressurized.
With the engines not working, of course, the air wasn't being pumped in. So gradually the pressure was leaking away.
With all 4 engines gone, the pressurized air is rapidly seeping out. The thinning level of oxygen makes passengers gasp. The crew reach for their oxygen masks. But First Officer Greaves can't get his mask to work.
My oxygen mask, yeah, that was a problem I could have done without. It was stowed above my head, and when I pulled the oxygen mask down, the mask and the tube became separated.
The captain must make a difficult choice. If he continues to descend slowly, it will get increasingly difficult for First Officer Greaves to breathe.
I said, look, if we get down to 20,000 feet quickly, we can all take our oxygen masks off and we can talk and we're back as a crew again.
We had to actually increase the rate of descent to descend to a lower altitude quicker, which in the circumstances was something that we wouldn't really have chosen to do.
So then I dived the aeroplane and got rid of about 6,000 feet in a minute.
The loss of cabin pressure and the steep dive have another terrifying consequence.
The things shot down, they sort of dangled down in front of you. And I looked to see Stephen had got his and Chaz had pulled his out of the socket. So I made sure that Chaz got his oxygen. I've seen a few movies on planes, and you know, once that happens, you know you're in serious trouble.
Come here. Here we go. Breathe normally, Mum, not deep. Breathe calmly.
The oxygen masks came down, and we put those to our faces as had been described in the drill, which fortunately we had been observing at the beginning of the flight. But it seemed that the oxygen supply was not working.
Come on, get in.
The cabin crew try to use the public address system to explain what's going on, but it's not working. Chief Steward Graham Skinner makes do with a low-tech backup.
Can you hear me? We're having a small problem with the public address system. So if you would, place your masks over your mouth and nose and breathe normally.
As the passengers struggle with their masks, Captain Eric Moody is running out of options. If his engines don't start soon, he'll have to turn his jet around and try landing on the open ocean. High above the Indian Ocean, the seemingly impossible has occurred. All 4 engines on a British Airways 747 have stopped working, and the crew has no idea why. First Officer Roger Greaves manages to fix his broken oxygen mask, but he's still frustrated by engines that won't start.
All right, Barry, let's start the restart drill. Ready? Set. Battery. Check. On. Standby power. On. Anything? Come on, anything.
No.
All right, then, let's do it from the top. Battery.
Check. On.
First Officer Greaves and Engineer Barry Townley Freeman have actually shortened the standard restart drill. It's giving them more chances to get the engines going, but so far nothing's working.
Come on, you old sod.
The process that we were going through the whole time was just continuous. We hadn't had any success with the drill at all, despite all the efforts we were putting in. But it was the only thing we had left to cling on to, so that's what we did.
From the top again. Battery. Check. On.
I have no idea, and I don't think any of us have, how many times we tried to restart those engines. If I say 20, I would think that's too low. If I say 50, I would think that's probably about right.
As the plane falls lower and lower, Captain Moody faces a brutal choice. A mountain range cuts across the island of Java between his plane and the airport. He knows he has to be at least 3,500 meters high to clear it. But if his engines don't restart soon, they won't make it. At this rate, it will crash in a matter of minutes. It's just a question of where. Captain Moody decides if the engines don't restart soon, he'll turn back towards the ocean and try landing on the water.
All right, are we getting something?
It's not starting.
I knew it was so difficult to land aeroplanes on the sea, even when you had everything going for you. And I thought that, well, we haven't got much going for us here. I'd never done it before.
Hiding his concern, Captain Moody addresses the passengers and crew.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a small problem. All 4 engines have stopped. We're doing our damnedest to get it under control. I trust you are not in too much distress.
Most of the passengers expect the worst.
Ma, in trouble. Plane going down.
We'll do best for the boys. We love you. Sorry, Pa. I thought we were going down, heading for the ocean, which crashed. And I thought if she got the note, you know, she knew we were still thinking about it. And we did whatever we could.
Will we be burnt alive? Will we be choked by the smoke? Will the aircraft break up in the air and hurtle us out into space, which was my biggest fear? Or will we come down in the sea and be eaten by sharks alive? Or will we crash into a mountain? Let's crash into a mountain quickly and get all this over.
Well?
Nothing. It's not starting.
All right, from the top then. Battery. Check.
On.
Standby power.
On.
Finally, Captain Moody has to decide. Carry on and likely crash into the mountains, or turn around and ditch into the sea.
I don't know how to swim.
I couldn't swim anyway, so I thought, well, you know, I'm doomed anyway. And I just hoped that maybe one of the passengers might help the two boys to make sure that they could stay afloat.
Well, anything? No. All right then, from the top again, Godfrey.
We had very few chances left of starting the engines before having to turn out to sea again, because we wouldn't have been able to clear the mountains on the south coast of Java.
Start level. Cut off.
Fuel pressure.
Available.
Standby ignition on.
And then, as suddenly as it had stopped working, the fourth engine roars back to life.
Engine 4 back online.
Then all of a sudden there was this sort of like somebody giving the aeroplane a punch from underneath. And then I realised that there might have been an engine. It was a boom.
Oh my God, look!
The noise that a Rolls-Royce engine makes when it starts up is low rumbling noise, you know, and it was just, well, it was wonderful to hear it.
A 747 can fly with one engine, but Captain Moody knows that just one engine still won't give him enough power to clear the mountains.
The glass now is half full, it's not half empty. We're now in with a real chance. And I tell you what, the three of us would have dragged that aeroplane around the whole island of Java.
As the plane falls past 4,000 meters, another engine coughs and comes back to life.
Engine 3 back online.
It's followed quickly by the final two.
Do you believe it? Engines 1 and 2 both back online.
From almost certain disaster, the crippled jet is now under full power.
Oh my God,
I realised then that we could make it back to, not to Perth, but to an airport. That's all we wanted, was to land on the earth and you know, be part of the living again. Because while we were up there, we were dead.
Jakarta, Speedbird 9, we are back in business. All four running, all four.
This time, local controllers have no trouble understanding the message.
All 4 engines serviceable again. Confirm continuing to Halim.
Affirmative, affirmative.
We say, right, let's get this thing on the ground as quickly as we can.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We seem to have overcome that problem and have managed to start all the engines. We are diverting to Jakarta and expect to land in about 15 minutes.
Captain Moody begins climbing, putting plenty of room between his plane and the mountains below. But as he does, the strange lights that he saw when the crisis began reappear in front of the jet.
Now, as soon as we got to 15,000 feet, this St Elmo's fire started again. Now, I'm not slow, so I said, let's get out of here quickly.
But before he can descend very far, the plane is stricken again.
Engine 2 is surging.
The whole aeroplane was shaking. It was just going bang, bang, bang.
The atmosphere in the cabin was very tense and very quiet. By then, I think very few people were talking. I think there were quite a lot of prayers going up.
The engines backfire violently. The captain must make another fateful decision.
Begin shutdown drill.
Checklist powering gear.
Off.
Thrust lever.
Closed.
We were reluctant to do it, as you can probably understand, but, you know, that was it. So we were back on 3 engines.
Now, I'm not a coward, but when you've had 4 engines going, no engines going, you get 4 going and show me any pilot that will quickly shut down that engine, because you're worried that they're all going to stop again.
Jakarta, Speedbird 9, leaving 154-120. We are now on 3 engines.
As the plane closes in on the airport, First Officer Greaves thinks the windshield is covered in moisture, making it hard to see through.
And I said to Eric, it's a bit misty out there. So we turned the blowers on to kind of, like demisters on your car to try and clear that. That didn't work. I used the windscreen wipers, and that didn't work.
Somehow the glass itself has been badly damaged.
For some unknown reason, I looked out the edge of my windscreen, and about a 2-inch strip down the edge on the left-hand side, I could see much more clearly. But I couldn't see anything much out the front. It was getting more and more opaque the nearer and nearer we got to the lights.
The crew get a final unwelcome surprise. Equipment on the ground that helps them descend at the proper angle isn't working.
Jakarta ATC, be advised, our glide path is unserviceable.
The localizer, which gives you the left and right of the runway centerline, that was working, but the glide slope, which gives you the actual profile for the descent, was not working.
After all the troubles they've been through, now the crew has to land their plane manually.
We then continued with Eric flying the localizer and me calling out the distance and the altitude that he should be at.
300 feet, Captain.
So he was then able to adjust his rate of descent to what I was telling him as far as the glide slope was concerned.
200. 150 feet, Captain. 100. 50 feet. 30 feet.
Oh my God. Oh my God. We're on the runway.
Reverse.
$90 knots, 80 knots.
We're down. Could really go for a cold soda.
And the aeroplane just landed itself. It seemed to anyway. It kissed the earth. It was beautiful.
That's amazing.
Safely on the ground at Halim Airport in Jakarta, passengers celebrate the end of a harrowing ordeal. They also want to know what happened. No fire had been found, so why had smoke filled the cabin? How could all 4 engines have stopped at nearly the same time? What were the strange lights that surrounded the plane? In the cockpit, the flight crew are relieved, but also concerned that they might be at fault.
The first thing that we did, having parked the airplane and shut it all down, was to then go through all the paperwork to see if there was possibly anything anywhere in it that might have given us any pre-warning of some sort of phenomenon that caused what happened to us.
Every time, because it's going to come back to us.
The damage to the 747 is extensive. From the outside, the crew realize that their windshield had been deeply scratched. They see bare metal showing through where the paint has somehow been stripped away. And they still have no idea why any of it happened. When investigators uncover the cause of the disaster, Flight 9 changes pilot training around the world. During a calm flight to Australia, all 4 engines of a British Airways 747 suddenly stopped working. After a long, terrifying descent, the crew managed to restart the engines and land.
Wow, that's amazing.
They spent an excited and largely sleepless night in Jakarta, before returning to Halim Airport to inspect their plane.
And we went back the next day to look at it in daylight. The aeroplane had lost its sheen, and in some places it had been sandblasted quite well, and all the decals and the paint had come off. It really was very little to see until they stripped the engines down.
The engines were manufactured by Rolls-Royce. Their investigation was led by a former engineer, Malcolm Grayburn.
3 of the engines were removed in Jakarta following the incident and were ferried back via cargo aircraft to London Heathrow and then transported to South Wales, where the engines were in fact stripped down into piece parts, and it was there that I got involved.
Grayburn was stunned by what he saw. Much of the engine was badly scratched and scored.
We did do a forensic analysis of the engines, and we did record it all in terms of photographic analysis, and also we did a lot of laboratory analysis.
Grayburn discovered the engines were choked with fine dust, pieces of rock and sand. When it was closely studied, they learned that the debris was clearly volcanic ash. Days after their harrowing flight, the passengers and crew learned that the night they were flying, there'd been a major eruption of the Mount Galunggung volcano, located just 160 kilometers southeast of Jakarta. Tom Casadevall is director of the US Geological Survey and has studied the Galunggung volcano.
Indonesia is the world's most volcanically active country. It has more than 130 historically active volcanoes, meaning volcanoes which have erupted in the last several thousand years. Galunggung erupted explosively early in the 1980s. In April, May, June of 1982, the eruptions became increasingly more powerful.
The eruptions were large and the damage was extensive. More than 60,000 people were evacuated from the area around the mountain. The night Flight 9 flew nearby, the volcano erupted again. As the ash cloud rose more than 15,000 meters into the night, winds pushed it to the southwest, right into the path of British Airways Flight 9. Never before had a volcanic cloud seriously affected an airplane. Could the ash really have crippled this flight?
Roger, declare emergency.
Mayday, 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 Speedbird 9. We have lost all 4 engines.
Unlike ash that you might see in a chimney or after a fire in a forest, this is not soft material at all. This is very fine, ground-up particles of solid rock and minerals. This material is very, very abrasive. It's very angular in shape. If you were to see it under a microscope, you would see very sharp angles. And so that's what caused the abrasion.
In addition to sandblasting the windshield and all the leading edges of the plane, could the ash cloud explain all the other strange phenomena the passengers and crew had experienced?
Remember, the aircraft is moving in close to 500 miles per hour as it's flying into that cloud. Even though it's a very fine material, it can still cause abrasion and friction on the skin of the aircraft. Because it's such a dry environment up there, that frictional electrification produces the glow that we refer to as St. Elmo's fire.
The electrification also caused the interference in communication experienced by the crew.
Speedbird 9, you have lost number 4 engine?
Some of the volcanic ash that was sucked in and ground up by the engines was also blown into the plane, and when passengers and crew saw it swirling through the cabin, they feared the worst.
You're a passenger, you're looking out the window, suddenly you start breathing this sulfur-laden air in the cabin, and it probably is a choking, probably a shocking sensation. It's essentially a house of horrors type situation.
While the volcanic ash caused the visible scarring, filled the plane with smoke and fouled communications, could it cause the engines to flame out as well? A turbofan jet engine works by sucking in enormous amounts of air. The air is then highly pressurized by the engine's compressor. This tightly packed air is mixed with fuel and ignited. The force of this reaction propels the jet through the sky.
The temperature in the combustion chamber where this ash was flowing through are around 2,000 degrees centigrade. And so the volcanic ash we know melts at about 1,300, 1,400 degrees.
But when the liquid ash reached deeper into the engine, it cooled slightly, turning into a sticky, molten goo. It attached itself to the engine and began choking it.
We got a fundamental disturbance of the airflow in the main core of the engine, which caused the engine to backfire, and the engine's flamed out, and that was the cause of the problem.
Backfires occur when the engine isn't burning cleanly.
The engine's on fire!
There's too much fuel and not enough oxygen.
Engine failure, number 4.
Fire action, number 4.
Checklist powering gear.
On Flight 9, the backfires were the cause of the enormous jets of flame many passengers saw behind the engines. After struggling against the choking effects of the ash cloud, the engines on board the 747 flamed out. What Greyburn found next was that a remarkable piece of chemistry saved the plane.
As soon as you came out of the volcanic ash, and the engines were not running, remember, so everything cooled down, it was enough for this stuff to break off and allow the engines to restart.
When enough of the molten ash was gone, the engines were clear again, and Townley Freeman's frantic efforts to restart them paid off.
Engine 4, back online.
We have learned quite a bit, and we've incorporated this learning into pilot training. Pilots now, for example, know what signs to look for when they might be in an ash cloud, and those signs include the odor of sulfur in the cabin, dust accumulating in the cabin, and if you're at night, you might look out and see the frictional electrification or the St. Elmo's fire on the leading edges of the aircraft.
Another important lesson learned from Flight 9 is that volcanic ash clouds do not appear on normal weather radar, which reflects water. Since the clouds are dry, they're all but invisible to radar. That knowledge has led to better communications between the geologists that study volcanoes and the international airlines that fly over them. The crew of Flight 9 was showered with awards and commendations in the months after their incredible night.
I thought the airmanship displayed by this crew during this event was absolutely fantastic. The way that they managed to guide this aircraft back down to a safe landing after having been through such extreme circumstances, it was fantastic the way they recovered this aircraft. Absolutely brilliant.
For everyone on board Flight 9, the terrifying plunge through the skies had a lasting impact. Betty Tootell was so struck by the events of that night that she wrote a book about the ordeal.
This was an event which was unique in aviation history, and it seemed to me absolutely vital that it should be put on record, and I wondered who was going to do this. But no sooner had that thought entered my mind than I thought, I'm going to do that.
Tootell would also end up marrying a man she met on the flight, James Ferguson. Charles Capewell and his 2 sons made it home 2 days after they touched down in Jakarta. 25 years later, both Chas and Stephen still live in Perth.
Our time hadn't came and that was it. From then on, I took a different view of life. When your time comes, there's nothing you can do, but you can still hope. And we hoped, and we got out of it.
Not long after their fateful flight, Captain Eric Moody created the Galungung Gliding Club. Every member of the crew and all passengers were automatically admitted to this exclusive group. The survivors of British Airways Flight 9 happily stay in touch to this day. In the cabin, the flight attendants and passengers have no idea that their plane is dangerously low on fuel.
Then the go-around procedure is stating that the power be applied slowly.
In the cockpit, the crew now hastily discuss the go-around procedure. What the manual says they must do if they can't find the runway through the fog and low clouds and have to go around a second time. It's standard procedure.
Power be applied slowly and to avoid rapid accelerations and to have a minimum of nose-up attitude.
To maintain what? Minimum nose-up attitude. That means...
Flight engineer Moyano is concerned that if the captain were to pull up the plane's nose too sharply, all the remaining fuel would slosh to the back of the tank, causing engines to stop.
Covered on fuel during the go-around. What it means is it doesn't contain fuel for feeding itself and a flameout could occur. And it is necessary to lower the nose again.
Right now we are proceeding to the airport inbound. We have 17 miles.
Roger.
This means we'll have hamburger tonight.
Avianca, descend and maintain 3,000.
Descend and maintain 3,000. Avianca 052 Heavy.
3,000 feet. They got us. They're already vectoring us.
No, they are descending us. And they are giving us priority.
Avianca 052 Heavy. Contact Kennedy Tower 119.1. Good day.
Only minutes before landing, Flight 52 is handed off to a JFK tower controller whose shift is about to end.
Avianca 052 Heavy, Kennedy Tower 22 left. You are number 3 following 727 traffic on a 9-mile final.
Avianca 052 Heavy, roger. Can I lower the landing gear yet? No, I think it's too early. If we lower the landing gear, we have to maintain a very high nose attitude.
So desperately low is their fuel that the first officer wants to delay putting down the landing gear, which will increase the aircraft's drag, requiring more power and using more of what little fuel they have remaining.
I was so happy. For me, it was like a joy. I mean, we're going to land soon and this is going to be end.
Avianca 052, what is your airspeed?
Avianca 052, 140 knots.
Avianca 052, can you increase your airspeed 10 knots?
10? Okay, 10 knots, increasing.
Increase.
10 knots more.
Tell me things louder because I'm not hearing it. Lower the gear. Gear down.
Avianca 052, 22 left, wind 190 at 20, cleared to land.
Clear to land, Avianca 052 Heavy. Wind check, please.
190 at 20.
With the weather deteriorating and flying on fumes, the crew of Flight 52 will have only one chance of getting their 149 passengers safely on the ground.
Avianca 052, say airspeed.
145 knots. Are we cleared to land now? Yes, sir, we are clear to land.
Stand by. Flaps 50. Landing checklist complete.
It was extremely important that Avianca 52 landed on their first approach, JFK. The voice recorder revealed that the captain was certainly quite concerned about the fuel state, and he was talking aggressively with the first officer, putting out flaps, getting the airplane configured.
It was time for the flight engineer to say, this is the only approach we're going to be able to make, and he didn't.
Give me 50. Claps 50 now.
All set for landing.
Standing by for lights. Slightly below glide slope. 1,000 feet above field. Instruments cross-checked, slightly below.
Stand by for lights.
Stand by. The wind is slightly from the left, 190 to 20. Below glide slope.
With about 10 minutes of fuel remaining, and nearly 4 kilometers from the runway, Flight 52 finds itself flying into violent wind shear, forcing them to slow the plane down.
They were getting like 60 knots of wind on the nose, and then as they descended on down through about 500 feet to the ground, they were down to 20 knots. So that's 40 knot change and 1,000 feet of elevation. That's a lot.
This is the wind shear.
Now the wind changes direction. It's pressing them down towards the ground.
Glide slope!
Glide slope.
Sink rate 500 feet.
Glide slope.
The captain desperately searches for the runway, but it's shrouded in low clouds and fog.
Terrain.
Lights! The runway, where is it? I don't see it. I don't see it.
The plane's warning system is telling them that they're about to crash.
seat rate, 500 feet.
Just 4 kilometers from touchdown, Flight 52 has been caught in violent wind shear. To save the plane, Captain Caviedes applies full throttle, burning up more of the plane's precious fuel.
Give me the landing gear up, landing gear up!
The airplane was about 200 feet above the ground, about 2 miles from the runway, which was well below the glide slope and very dangerous. So the airplane almost crashed on its first approach.
When you get a missed approach, now it changes the whole ball game.
Request another traffic pattern.
Executing a missed approach. Avianca 052 Heavy.
The operation of pulling the plane up in the missed approach was a very violent one.
I don't know what happened with the runway. I didn't see it.
I didn't see it either. I didn't see it.
Avianca 052, you were
Making a left turn, correct, sir?
Tell him we are in emergency.
2,000 feet. That's right, to 180 on
the heading, and we'll try once again. We are running out of fuel.
Okay.
What did he say?
I already advised him that we are going to attempt again.
Advise him we are in an emergency. Do you tell him?
Yes, sir, I already advised him.
But the tower controller, at the end of his shift, transfers Avianca 52 to his counterpart in approach control. They'll have to begin all over again.
Contact approach on 118.4.
Approach, Avianca 052 Heavy. We just missed a missed approach and we are maintaining 2,000. Flaps 14.
Avianca 052 Heavy, New York.
Good evening. Climb and maintain 3,000.
Advise him we don't have fuel.
Climb and maintain 3,000. We are running out of fuel, sir.
Okay, fly heading 080.
Did you already advise him we don't have fuel?
Yes, sir, I already advised him. We are going to maintain 3,000 and he's going to get us back.
As they get back in the pattern and circle the field and come back in again. That again adds to the traffic jam that was being created at Kennedy Airport.
Avianca 052 Heavy,
I'm going to turn you about 15 miles northeast and then bring you back onto the approach. Is that okay with you and your fuel?
What did he say?
The guy is angry. I guess so. Thank you very much.
These guys were out, and they didn't say we were out. And he allowed the approach control to vector him way out in the original pattern and 15 miles north of the outer marker again.
Flight 52 is instructed to fly a long approach pattern for another landing attempt. The plane is down to its last dregs of fuel as the crew waits for final clearance from ground controllers.
And then they were run way out towards Long Island and vectored all around, which was equivalent to holding for another 15-20 minutes.
Did you get clearance yet?
Can you give us a final yet? Avianca 052 Heavy.
Avianca 052.
Affirmative, sir. Turn left, heading 040. Climb and maintain 3,000.
Negative, sir. We are running out of fuel.
Okay, turn left, heading 310, sir.
Set flaps 14.
Okay, and you're number 2 for the
approach. I just have to give you enough room so you can make it without
having to come out again.
Okay. We're number 2 and flying 360 now.
Avianca 052 Heavy, turn left, heading 330.
The lights in the aircraft start to flicker, a sign that the engines are being starved of fuel.
330 on the heading, Avianca 052.
Once there's no fuel flowing through the pump out of the tank, an amber light comes on to tell you that tank is empty.
Flame out! Flame out on engine number 4! Flame out on it! Flame out on engine number 3! Coming the runway.
The passengers can hear the sound of the engines beginning to shut down.
When the engines went off, I looked over to the lady that was sitting next to me, and I asked her to give me her hand. And I philosophically accepted, I might die here. This is it.
Avianca 052, we just lost 2 engines, and we need priority, please.
Avianca 052.
Turn left, heading 250, intercept the localizer.
250, roger.
Select the ILS.
ILS.
Avianca 052, you're 15
miles from the outer marker. Maintain 2,000 until established in the localizer. Cleared for ILS 22 left.
Roger, Avianca.
You select the ILS.
It's ready on 2.
When all the engines flame out and the generators fall off the line, a considerable amount of power is lost, electrical power is lost.
In the cabin, the screams, the crying, and then this terrible sound of the wind against the fuselage as the plane drops from the sky.
Avianca 052, radar contact lost.
Avianca is missing due to the weather thing.
Yeah, Avianca 52 lost an engine.
We're trying to find out why.
Yeah, we're no longer talking to Avianca. He's 15 northeast of Kennedy.
Ah, wonderful.
At Clipper 18, turn left heading 180.
6.5 hours after leaving Columbia, Avianca Flight 52 is missing somewhere over New York.
Yes, hello. I live in Cove Neck in Oyster Bay, and there is a plane crashed in our yard in front of our house.
When I woke up, the first thing that I did, I put my hand over here in my back, and I was bleeding. I said, "Oh my God, we crashed."
Both my legs were broken, and I had, blood all over the place.
El asiento en el que estaba sentada la hija mía, sí recuerdo que estaba.
The seat where my daughter was sitting was totally destroyed by pieces of steel that happened to have come from the wing.
Pedazos de hierro que entraron del ala y lo.
I found my baby Daniela amongst the pieces of a torn-up, twisted chair. And I picked her up like this, and she was drenched in blood.
Bañada en sangre.
Avianca Flight 52 has crashed on Long Island, New York, less than 28 kilometers from JFK Airport. From deep in the woods, medical technician Bob O'Brien can hear the survivors before he can see the shattered 707.
What I first heard was it were just some people who were crying in pain, but it was apparent immediately what had happened when the plane hit the mountain and just stopped dead.
It just fell out of the sky. That's how witnesses describe the crash of Avianca Flight 52. A strangely silent crash.
There was not a big fire here. That will make it easier for investigators to examine if there were any gas or engine problems.
There have been reports of lightning in the area just before the plane went down.
For the controllers union says that Kennedy is critically understaffed, a problem that is compounded by bad weather.
Rescuers have not yet given up on finding more victims.
Lo primero que me acuerdo es que yo miro y
First thing I remember is that I looked up and I saw a priest. He was praying for me and I was lying down on the ground. Right above us, I saw 3 or 4 helicopters flying over us.
3 o 4 helicópteros volando encima mío.
I managed to get up on top of the fuselage, and there's that door handle that says, in case of emergency, pull here. So I pulled that door handle, and that door handle just went, and the door came open about 4 inches. And then I was able to flip that over, and I could just see piles and piles of people strapped in their seats.
The extreme G-force of the crash has broken off the cockpit and catapulted it through a stand of trees and into the deck of a home some 30 meters from the impact site.
Come on, somebody get the back here.
And I saw some cables, and I saw a big hole in the fuselage over the passengers that were sitting next to me who were kind of unconscious.
And on top of me was this guy who was bleeding, a big guy, I don't know who he was, but he was on top of me, but I was sitting.
I pulled myself with those cables towards that hole, which was over the wing.
I started screaming, "Hey, help me out, help me, take me out of here." And then somebody, when they realized that I was alive, they removed they took away the guy who was on top of me, and they took me out of the airplane.
At that moment, a fireman was climbing on the wing, and he saw me, and he said, "There's a guy here," and he pulled me out.
37 fire and rescue companies from Nassau County are quickly mobilized. The rescue is the largest pre-9/11 operation of its kind in the New York area.
That little girl was sitting up on the fuselage and she was crying, "Mi madre, mi madre." And that imprint of horror just was, you know, you just in your mind's eye focus right back in on, I saw mi madre, I saw her mother, and I know what that little girl was seeing. It was horrible enough for me, and I'm a professional rescuer.
Entonces yo inmediatamente me di cuenta.
I realized that my baby was dying, so I began to scream.
Please help me! I had the baby here, please.
The plane has crashed in the wealthy neighborhood of Cove Neck, near the home of the father of tennis star John McEnroe. Medics set up a makeshift triage unit on his lawn. When daylight breaks 10 hours later, 85 survivors have been pulled from the wreck. The lead flight attendant is the only member of crew to survive the crash. Of the 11 babies on board Flight 52, all but one are found alive. Bob O'Brien scours the tail section for survivors and finds FAA investigators struggling to remove the aircraft's black boxes.
I grabbed the handle and just pulled the whole box out and took that out and brought that out the door and gave it to them.
Even as people are being pulled from the wreckage, the on-site investigation begins. In charge on the ground is Barry Trotter of the National Transportation Safety Board. A former airline pilot, Trotter became an investigator after losing his right arm in a motorcycle accident.
The condition of the aircraft was really astonishing to see that that much of the structure was left in the condition that it was in.
Unaware of the details of Avianca's troubled flight, investigators quickly find a valuable piece of evidence.
You could look at the engines right away and you could tell the engines were not turning. So there was no power on the engines. That was the first big clue.
Trotter and his team examine the fuel tanks and find just a few gallons of jet fuel still on board. It becomes clear why the 707's engines stopped turning, but the question of who's to blame is still to be answered. In the community of Cove Neck, New York, salvage workers begin the task of dismantling the shattered remains of Avianca Flight 52. But there's still one critical question. Who is responsible for Flight 52 running out of fuel and causing the death of 72 passengers and crew? The answer will be worth millions of dollars and affect dozens of lives. At the lab of the National Transportation Safety Board in Washington, D.C., investigators are eager to recover data locked inside the two black boxes. The most telling of these is often the flight data recorder, which records critical information, such as the plane's altitude, airspeed, and heading.
When we recovered the flight data recorder and brought it to our lab in Washington, we opened it and found that the foil wrap was not hooked up, so someone had actually intentionally taped the end of the foil so it wouldn't fly around and put it back in the airplane.
Without the crucial flight data recorder, investigators rely heavily on Flight 52's cockpit voice recorder, which is found with more than 40 minutes of voice recordings of the crew and communications between the first officer and air traffic controllers.
Yes, sir. We are clear to land. Stand by. All set for landing. Below glide slope.
And it was apparent from the voice recorder transcript and tape that the captain was not understanding the first officer's radio communications that were being made in English.
Everybody wants to blame the pilot, but he may be the last person to make a decision, and the scenario which caused him to be in that position where he makes the decision was created by several other people along the route.
The captain asked the first officer about 9 times to clarify information or repeat it or to pass on information.
We are going to attempt again.
Faison, we are in an emergency. Do you tell him?
Did he make a conscious decision to run out of fuel? No. He was sucked into a situation by the air traffic controllers where he ran out of fuel.
Glide slow!
The cockpit voice recorder reveals a crew desperate to land the 707 in near zero visibility and in extreme wind shear without the aid of an autopilot.
In this case, the captain had a difficult time maintaining the glide slope during the approach with the wind shear, didn't see the airport, and had to make a go-around. That almost doomed the airplane at that point.
The information being given to pilots en route was a wind shear up as high as 1,500 feet. But their pilots on approach were encountering wind shear as low as 300 feet. And that wasn't passed on to the Avianca pilot.
This is the wind shear.
The crew of Flight 52 is caught off guard. As they descend below 150 meters and slow down, a violent vertical wind forces them towards the ground, nearly causing the plane to crash less than 4 kilometers short of the runway. Ironically, Avianca 52's lack of fuel resulted in no fire or explosion, saving the survivors from almost certain death.
If the flight would have found some level ground, it was conceivable he would have slapped the fuselage down and slid to a stop. With no fuel, there would have been no fire. And I think it's very possible that most of the people would have survived it in that case.
As the hearings into the crash begin, lawyer George Tompkins is confronted by controllers who maintain that the Avianca crew failed to use the word emergency, instead using the word priority to communicate their situation.
The government took the position that the pilot never declared an emergency, so no one knew that he had a problem. But saying you're getting low on fuel and saying you cannot make your alternate, the word emergency is not necessary to say.
Negative, sir. We are running out of fuel. We just lost 2 engines and we need priority, please.
And they thought they were telling them when they said we need priority.
Para nosotros en español, la palabra prioridad significa...
In Spanish, for us, the word priority means first.
Corre a mí, te estoy necesitando.
Attend to me, run to me. I need you right now.
No sé si es que...
I don't know if priority in other languages means that you can wait.
Significa que puedes esperar.
Avianca 052 only has 5 more minutes in the hold. You gonna be able to take him, or I'll set him up to his alternate?
What is his speed now?
I'm not sure, to be quite honest with you. Holding speed.
The NTSB concludes that air traffic's handling of Avianca 52 was proper, considering the information they were getting from the flight crew. Many of the passengers are shocked and outraged by what they feel is a gross injustice, that air traffic control is found blameless. Avianca sues the Federal Aviation Administration, which employs the air traffic controllers, saying they should have done more when Flight 52 told them they were running out of fuel. The FAA settles and ends up paying around 40% of the estimated $200 million compensation due to the victims.
If you listen and read the tapes, the transcripts of the tapes of each air route traffic control center along the route, and the final, the New York TRACON, New York Tower, Kennedy Tower, you'll find 20 places where this accident could have been avoided if somebody had done something differently.
Among the 85 survivors who escaped the shattered remains of Flight 52 are the Montoya's 2 daughters. Daniela, the baby covered in blood, is now a healthy teenager preparing for college.
The day just before the flight, we took a long trip to visit the Virgin Mary. This is a very important sanctuary in Medellin. Perhaps it was a miracle of God and the Virgin that the 4 of us survived. It was a miracle, and we feel blessed by that.
For many of the survivors, recovering from their injuries has been easier than coming to terms with the reason why Flight 52 ran out of fuel.
I had to learn to walk from scratch. It's difficult enough to deal with the injuries, it makes me very angry to think that a plane went down with 161 souls and had almost half the people lost their lives because of a word.